Hi everyone, welcome to a new edition of PMF Connect. My name is Julia, I'm going to be your host for today. And before we have our presentation from Andy March from Okta, I will just say a few words about Product Management Festival, our initiatives. We have a big announcement for today and how you can benefit from all the things that we're doing at PMF. Probably you're familiar with some of them, so I'm just gonna apologize up front if you're hearing this for the 5th, 6th, 10th time. But we do have something new for today. As you know, Product Management Festival is itself a conference. We run it every year in Zurich and Singapore. Our next edition will be on the 9th, 10th of November in Zurich, Switzerland. We're expecting over 1,000 product managers from all over the world to join us. So if you are available, have a budget for the conference, we are super happy to welcome you. Other things we are doing are local meetups, product management nights. Thankfully, we have started again to do them in person. The next one we're going to run is in Zurich on the 12th of July. But we also have other planned ones in Milano, New York. And if you are located in a place where you would like to organize one, we're always happy to help you find the speakers, announce it to our community. So if you have a bit of initiative and want to get involved, we're always looking for new ambassadors. Other things we are doing at PMF, Product Management Executive Program. This is an initiative we have with the Business School INSEAD. This is a 1-week program for either aspiring product leaders or product leaders who have just joined a company where they have maybe a more senior role like CPO, vice presidents of products. We know that with great power comes great responsibility, and maybe you need a bit of support in sharpening your leadership skills. This is the program which basically helps you improve on that area. It's 1 week in the France Fontainebleau campus, and there's different product leaders from different companies training you on this. You can see the program online, and if you have any questions, there's an info session scheduled for the 14th of July where you can ask anything. And the other thing we are doing is we publish every year a trends and benchmarks in product management report. And actually today is a super important day for us because after a few months of working on the new edition, we are finally launching it. So right now on the screen, you have a QR code. We haven't released it yet, so you would be among the first 100 people to view this data. So if you are interested, the report is absolutely free. We do it to support the community. Inside, you have a lot of information regarding salary benchmarks, how to structure a product management team, psychological safety, what type of leadership is the most effective, relationship between product owners and product managers inside the company, how to interact with other roles inside the product team, how to measure product success. I just want to say thank you to everybody who has contributed to this report, mainly my colleague Marina, who's also in the call today, our board members, Timo specifically. So this is a work, labor of love. So we do it absolutely to support the community, and all we want to in exchange is that you share it with your colleagues if you find it useful, and answer our survey for the next year when we will do it again. I will share as well after the call the link, so don't worry, you can download it. And from tomorrow on, it will also be officially announced on our channels. As I've mentioned, our next big event is in Switzerland, in Zurich, and it's another big milestone for us because this year we're running the 10th edition of Product Management Festival. And on that occasion, we'd like to offer for a limited time some discounts on the conference. These listed here are just some of the over 50 speakers who are going to take the stage this year. We have so many amazing professionals from so many companies, so many industries, and there's a lot to learn. So if you have the opportunity, I welcome you to join us in November. And with that being said, I would like to welcome our guest today, who is Andy March. He's going to speak to us today about achieving the frictionless customer experience. Let's see if it's an achievable task. Andy is a technical product manager at Okta, and I will invite him to share with us more. Thank you, Andy.
Awesome, thank you very much. And I will share you that screen so you can see what I'm doing. So, thank you everyone for joining. And let's drag some of this UI out of the way so I can still see you all. Hi, my name is Andy. I'm, as introduced, a technical product manager with Okta, which means I spend my time helping developers build better identity into their applications. I've worked in secure systems for probably a bit over 10 years, building everything from fighter planes, e-passport, citizen ID, and ATM systems. And today I'm going to talk to you about customers. So customers are probably the largest population of users in most systems, and they're often the ones over which we have the least control. Reset my timer. We're going to go over some of the patterns we see in the market, have a look at some of the leading practice, and what helps you protect your applications and your users' data without compromising that all-important customer experience. So we've developed entire industries to market to our customers to drive them towards our products. But if the experience of using that product is less than ideal, you can bet that your competition will be more than willing to claim that they offer what the customer wants. Now, this is what good online customer experience used to look like. This is a delivery notification email from CD Baby in 2006. This email was so successful that its recipients regularly posted it online. It was the viral marketing of its time. But the experience of e-commerce has changed massively in the last decade. And again, over the last couple of years, as we've been forced to transact more online, we're seeing traditionally brick and mortar businesses work out how they can adopt digital platforms to engage their customers. But the common question is, where do you start? This is from a PwC consumer intelligence survey. They asked their respondents to rank what they consider to be the most important factors in a transaction that they were willing to pay for. And we get a nice cluster up in the top right of efficiency, convenience, friendly service, knowledgeable service, and easy payment. But we're missing something here. We're missing security. It's not present on that graph at all. We assume that because we're interacting with a business, that they are making a good effort to protect that transaction. Do we sacrifice the customer's security to reach that efficient, convenient experience that they've asked for? After all, we can't force them to adopt good security posture in the way we would an internal employee or even a business partner. The UK National Cybersecurity Centre completed their first survey of British citizens' online security habits a couple of years ago. They found that only 15% of their respondents felt they understood how to protect themselves online. 1 in 3 respondents actually said they relied on their friends and family to help. So I'm guessing they're coming to one of us in this room to say, hey, what should I do with this? Is this email suspicious? Normally after they've clicked it. They found that less than 50% of people use a separate unique password for their email. When you realize how much of your online identity hinges around your email address, having that not secure is quite a frightening concept. As part of this research, they released the most commonly found passwords in breach datasets. So if we look at some of those, in fifth, 7 consecutive ones. That's my password. That's how I'm going to protect my account, just leaning on the top left key of my keyboard. Fourth, the always fan favorite password. So we've got some requirement for length there. Someone's added a capital letter. Third, QWERTY. So we're now on the top row of an English layout keyboard. Second, the numbers 1 to 9. We've got a good bit of length going on now. And in first, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Released in 1987, Spaceballs made this joke 30 years ago. Why haven't we learned? Why haven't we changed the behavior of our users to their own security? Because why should we care? We know we're going to have users with weak credentials. What is the impact? As long as they're using us and not our competition, we're okay, right? The threat here is an account takeover, an ATO. When access to a legitimate account is gained by an attacker, that attacker then has access to any resource or reputation that that account has to your service. The image here is actually the British Army Twitter account this weekend. This is a 10-year-old verified account of a government institution being used to push a scan MFT to 350,000 people. Not only does this make the user, in this case the British government, look a bit foolish for being compromised, it undermines the trust that users have in that service to protect the information that they place there. What could an attacker do with a legitimate account to your service? Can they make a fraudulent purchase? Can they view personally identifiable information about that user or even other users that they're connected to? From the NCSC survey, they found that users' most regular concern was being some victim of some kind of financial fraud. 42% of respondents felt it was not possible but likely to happen to them. But organizations have protection in place for their fraudulent financial transactions. Credit card companies protect the consumer. But what happens when what is accessed doesn't fall into the normal financial model? Loyalty schemes have been a prominent target over the last couple of years, as attackers are using breach credentials to password spray these services, looking for redeemable tokens that they can sell. In the wake of the pandemic, many of these programs have extended the use of points or allowed customers to hold on to status. Attackers are going after these accounts, which may be completely inactive, just to see what's stuck. Because these services are viewed as lower importance, consumers are using weak credentials to secure them. In many cases, the users aren't even aware that their accounts have been accessed. When was the last time many of us checked our frequent flyer status, for example? So to understand the balance we need to strike for our customers and for our organizations, we should build a risk model. We start with the identity that we want to access. Control of that identity is granted by a set of credentials, like a username and a password. We apply a set of mitigations to prevent common attacks against those credentials. Once we've gained access to the identity, we are granted a range of resources. The attacker is interested in those resources, what they can do with the identity once it has been compromised. To get access to that identity, they must present credentials in such a way that they're acceptable to any mitigation that we put in place. As we go through this session, we're going to look at a number of ways we can improve our credentials and our mitigations to prevent compromise, but also dynamically altering the access to resources to reduce the risk when an identity is compromised. So we're going to start with how we build that identity, registration. This is your first interaction with a potential customer and will likely set the tone for how they view your brand and your product and how much information they're willing to entrust you with. So who wants to buy a railway ticket? This is the registration form of a company that shall remain nameless. This one form combines all the data gathering from my profile and the setup of my credentials. There are 24 mandatory fields on that form. Occupation, gender, marital status, all mandatory. Don't know why they need them. They seem really excessive to the requirement of buying a ticket to travel. the chances are if I land on this while I'm trying to buy from you, I'm going to walk away, have a stiff drink, and consider my other options. It's a bit difficult to see, but my favorite part of this form is in the top left. It reads, garbage or junk values in profile may lead to deactivation. There's no definition of what that may be, so I can fill this in with the best of intentions, and if someone somewhere doesn't like the values I gave, my account will be deleted. Legislation such as the GDPR and the California CCPA have changed how users see their data, and more importantly, what the impact on an organization will be if that data is misused or compromised. We just saw a massive data collection form. All of that information is being stored somewhere. Is it being stored securely? What happens to that data if I never perform a transaction with that organization? We're seeing a massive shift towards just-in-time data collection or progressive profiling. If I don't have a need for the information, I shouldn't collect it. If we walk through an example of this, when the user first visits our site, we know nothing about them. We may cookie track them, for example. When that user interacts with us and wants to be added to a mailing list, the only information we need from them is an email address. When they return and want to buy something, we gather a physical address. If that user returns frequently, we might want to offer them a loyalty scheme, gain additional information from their account, and give them extra actions. By separating out the data gathering that builds the profile and aligning it with the action the user is trying to carry out, we reduce the compliance burden on the organization from holding information that's not immediately necessary, as well as reduce the friction for the user trying to get access to that particular action. So if we look at how this changes our risk model, we're going to build up the model based on the action the user is trying to carry out. The first action is joining that mailing list. So the identity just needs to be able to manage that relationship. All we need to gather for the profile is an email address. We can use that email address as a credential in its own right. We can send them one-time codes or magic links to access that resource. As we change the action, we should change the risk model. This time, the user wants to make a purchase. They need to provide additional information so that we can ship them their product. This time, we have two new resources. We're going to need to gather additional information for the profile. Now, we've increased the risk present on that profile, so we now need to modify the other side of the identity to compensate. In this case, we're going to add a password to secure the access to that account. A really common point when talking about any form of registration is social authentication. A common refrain I normally hear is, hey, we'll just add social, that way it will be easy. Everyone's got an account, they can just click and log in. With social authentication, when the user goes to log in, we offer them a choice of providers to select from. They pick their choice of provider, where they go and authenticate, and then we're returned some information about who that user is. There are a couple of problems with this model. Which social provider should you use to support your social sign-in? The usage of social media differs massively by demographic. The information pulled here is from the Pew Research fact sheet that looks at social media engagement by both age and by platform. Now, while Facebook is an obvious winner in terms of adoption, that's far from a final decision. Their adoption numbers have actually been pretty consistent since about 2016. So we know we need to offer a range of social platforms for our users to be able to log in. This creates a problem in its own right. Rather than asking the user to remember a password, we're now asking them to remember which service they used to sign into your service. This is the login prompt for Epic Games. I have credentials for about half of these services. Which one did I use when I created my account? What happens if I click the wrong one? Will the service reconcile those? Will it just dump me into an empty profile? 1Password is actually now running a beta where they'll allow you to remember which federated provider you used for a given service. But what about data quality? It would be wrong to talk about social auth without mentioning Apple. At their developer conference in 2019, Apple announced they would be offering their own federated identity provider. The concept behind this was to allow users to sign in with their existing Apple ID to any apps they downloaded without having to go and create a new profile for each of them. However, their provider has one major caveat: privacy. If a user chooses, they can modify their name and email value that they send back to you when they sign in. This is the email address you would get back from a user signing in with Apple ID. While any email you send to this address will be forwarded onto the user, you can't link this to any existing contact you've had with that user in your system. So you're still going to need to ask the user to provide another identifier if they already had some form of account. Depending on what information you require from a user during registration, social sign-in might not be enough. For example, if you support sign-in with Twitter, you're just going to get a string of characters and potentially a picture of a blob as an avatar, not really what you want to attach to a valuable transaction. So we're still going to need to perform some form of registration before I can get that account into a point that it's ready to transact. This moves us towards a model where having native account creation is actually preferable. We have total control over the registration and onboarding experience. We can get our user into a transactional state as quickly as possible, gathering just the information we need to perform that transaction. However, we should still offer social providers as a method of authentication. After all, the reason they are successful is because it eases the burden of the user accessing the service. They're probably already signed in with that social provider if they have it. But we should link these back to the account that we control. Managing this linking is critical. This is really important when you look at some of the risks associated to social authentication into accounts. In May this year, a paper was released looking at methods of potential compromise on mainstream services using social authentication. My favorite being an attacker creating an account on a social network that the service supports, but the user does not use, with their email address, and using that to sign into the service, at which point the two accounts are linked. I have linked this paper in the slides, which I believe we're sending out afterwards. It makes for fantastic reading if you're thinking about or even already offer social sign-in to your services. There's a lot of complexity here that doesn't get considered when social authentication is adopted. So once we have the identity created, we need to be really confident that the person we're communicating with is actually the user they claim to be. In my example earlier, I just applied a password as soon as the account contained any sensitive information, but that may not always be the best choice. Passwords have been the default credential for a very long time. Users understand them, the creation of them, however weak that credential is an expected part of the registration process. Now, the default response to weak credentials is, we'll just change the minimum policy. This took us from the really simple, must be 8 characters alphanumeric, to must be 12 characters, 1 upper, 1 lower, 1 punctuation, the blood of a newborn goat. The user who chose password is just going to end up with password. It's better, but it's still not great. This GitHub repo actually keeps track of customer-facing websites with password rules that its contributors think are awful. Some of these make great reading. My favorite being, your password cannot have any spaces and will not be case sensitive. I don't know what they're doing with that password to store it, but I'm going to guess it's not leading practice. This is from the point and laugh school of security thinking, where if your policy is so bad that customers are going out of their way to ridicule it, how many customers are just choosing not to interact, to abandon your service? The data set that the NCSC used earlier for those breach passwords was haveibeenpwned.com. If you're not familiar with this service, go give it a try. Enter your email address, and it will return any data dumps that your email address appears in. As such, this service holds a large number of data dumps, and all of this can be accessed via the API. Our security evangelism team built PassProtect based on this API. When a user enters their password, it sends a part of that hash to the Pawned Passwords API, which returns any possible matches for that hash fragment, allowing the script to check if the password's complete hash is in the data dump without sharing the full hash with the service. If you find a match, you can alert the user that their password is insecure and hopefully nudge them in the direction of a better behavior. This is what the experience looks like when using the browser extension, but this same logic can be embedded into any page and branded. While passwords aren't going anywhere anytime soon, our hope is that you can take out the low-hanging fruit without impacting the user experience. So if passwords are weak and we need to look at other options of authentication, what should we use in addition to or in place of that password? Customers are actively seeking out services which support multi-factor protection. This screenshot is from twofactorauth.org, where you can search for a website or a technology sector and see what providers offer MFA, what factors they support. When organizations think about MFA, they often think of the expensive hardware tokens that guarded access to their VPN and the like. Traditional MFA like this does not work for customers. I worked a long time ago with a banking organization who was shipping hardware tokens to their VIPs. These were individuals who needed to transact large sums of money wherever they were in the world, their home, their office, their yacht. The usage of those tokens was incredibly low. They were paying a lot of money for the tokens, so we had to go and look at why that usage was low. It turned out the general pattern that they followed was when they wanted to carry out a transaction, they needed their token, which was wherever they happened not to be. So they just rang their customer contact and told them they wanted to transact anyway. Because they were such a high value customer, nobody said no. No one wanted to lose that customer because of a bad experience, so they bypassed multi-factor security. What approaches are actually useful for customer multi-factor? Dynamically delivered OTP is probably the most common. You send a one-time code to the user's phone or to their email, and they enter that into the channel they're already using to interact. The enrollment is simple, the cost is based on usage, and it's near enough free. Google actually rolled out a program in May last year to automatically adopt users into MFA if they had the required information already enrolled with Google to set up MFA. But is any of this secure? With any technical obstacle we put in place, there are attack vectors against it. Multi-factor is only as secure as the user's email account. We saw earlier that those can be poorly protected. SMS has come under particular scrutiny recently, with both the European Banking Authority and NIST announcing their concerns as to its usage, given the prevalence of a SIM swapping attack. This attack requires just convincing your target's mobile phone provider that they've switched device and need their number porting to a SIM card that you, the attacker, control. These campaigns have been really successful. Last year, we saw a range of attacks against people on Twitter, even Jack Dorsey, the then CEO. Apparently, all of these individuals use the same US cell phone network. So the attackers were reusing a social engineering script that they knew would get through that company's policy to take over MFA protected accounts. The rising star in this space is really the multi-factor app. Time-based OTP can now be implemented on the user's phone, giving the security of a hardware-based token generation with the secure enclave on those devices in a device that the user is going to carry with them. If I leave my phone somewhere, I'm going to go back and get it. The logical extension to this is to be able to push a notification down to that user when an event occurs. So the confirmation is performed in a separate channel to the request and ideally includes context for the user as to what is happening. Are you trying to log into a service? Are you trying to carry out a particular transaction? We see this specifically with things like the UK open banking regulations of requiring strong customer authentication with context. And finally, we see new standards such as FIDO, which aim to be able to offer a better experience for hardware-based authenticators. Now, this could be Touch ID on my Mac or a YubiKey I go and purchase myself. These authenticators are based on public key cryptography and don't require me to manage any of the key material directly, which has been the downfall of previous crypto-based solutions. Through the work of the W3C, we now have a public standard to be able to complete user authentication beyond mutual TLS. Browser adoption continues to increase, so even we're now seeing mobile Safari able to support a form of WebAuthn. And my clicker's dying. Beautiful. There we go. So let's have a look at what happens to our risk model when we layer multi-factor onto the account. When we add a new resource that we want to protect, our identity is more valuable. So we balance that on the other side by adding a credential to even out the risk against the credentials that are in place to access that identity. Layering more and more authentication onto our user is going to greatly degrade the user experience. If I need to complete a complex multi-stage authentication process every time I want to log into the service, I'm not going to use the service, or I'm going to look for alternatives. I had a customer recently who rolled out multi-factor to their entire customer identity platform. I'm a customer of that organization. I wanted to order food through them. I actually abandoned making my purchase because they needed to email me an OTP to log in from my phone. I've previously logged in from that device. You should know who I am. Why am I going through an extended authentication that I don't think is warranted for the action that I'm trying to carry out? Just as we did with the registration, we can adjust the points at which we force a user to complete authentication to reduce the friction based on what they're trying to accomplish. To do this, we need to take signal from more than just the user. Who is the user and what are they trying to access? That is user supplied context. They have to interact with the service to give us that information. We also have service inferred context. Where is the user coming from? What is the action they're trying to perform? And does this match their normal pattern of usage? Think of this in the same way that you would your credit card. If I go down the road and I go and purchase a coffee after this, that's a normal pattern of behavior for me. I'm making a purchase that's within my normal amount in a location that I'm normally in. That transaction will go through. If I turn up halfway around the world tomorrow trying to buy a sports car on my credit card, that action should be declined. It's outside of my normal pattern of behavior. Once we add additional context signals into our risk model, we can see things such as the user coming from a new device, a new location. Perhaps we deny them access to a resource, or we push them to a different resource entirely to get help. When we're speaking about consuming all of these signals, we need to understand where they're coming from. Our identity layer will be generating one set of information about our user's authentication pattern. Our applications are going to be generating more granular information about what the user's actions are inside the application. We need to aggregate these together to get a clearer picture of what is happening. Tools like log streaming allow us to combine these different feeds and build queries of the data that interests us. This should be capable of generating alerts when those patterns deviate outside of normal. If we're seeing a high number of failed logins for users who don't exist in the system, we could be seeing the signs of a password spray attack. If we have users turning up in unfamiliar geographies, it could indicate account takeover. The mitigations for each of these is different, but monitoring the system as a whole allows you to respond quickly when they occur. So let's take a look at our final model with each component in place. We have a user with a fully developed profile that we want to protect. Contextual mitigation determines that the login is from a new device in a new location. The user successfully completes password-based authentication. We still offer them the functionality to perform a sensitive operation, but we block when the action is selected. And we ask for additional verification of their identity via MFA. Here we're picking a suitable factor. We're using it selectively only when that risk of their action is elevated. When we pass the MFA verification, we can feed that back into the context about the user and allow us to revisit the policy enforcement point for accessing a sensitive application, and we can then grant access. So I wanted to leave you with a couple of points to remember. Understand who your user is. Having a solid understanding of your demographic lets you make an appropriate decision about how best to protect their identity from the threats to their account. and the way that you're doing so does not impede their ability to use the service how they expect. Distributing the data collection down to a transactional level reduces the burden on your user, allowing them to get to the action they want quickly, and reduces the compliance overhead for your organization, storing extraneous data about the user. Doing the same with your authentication reduces the fatigue your users experience when signing in, while allowing you to maintain confidence in the identity of the user making the transaction. Finally, monitoring the system to determine what is normal behavior will allow you to understand what a threat pattern looks like for your application and intelligently apply mitigations to defeat them. Thank you. If you want to learn more about how modern IDP can help you improve the customer experience of your product, please check out auth0.com. The slides from today are up on Speaker Deck, and I believe we're going to send those out as well. I think we have roughly 10-15 minutes for questions.
Thank you so much, Andy. This was very educative, and I would like to, before anybody asks questions, by the way, if you have questions, please just type them in the chat. We can take them after. I think maybe now I'm referring to product managers because that's mostly what we are in this call and in general in our audience. And I think maybe it's not so evident for product managers. Why should they care about this? And I'm sure there are reasonings like in user engagement or others. But I would like you to just state why should we as product managers preoccupy ourselves with aspects like these.
Cool. So probably the best example I've got is a customer I worked with for our conference last year, Crate & Barrel in the US. They changed how their registration process worked. So they adjusted their cart abandonment rate by 18%. So that is users who are going through registration during a checkout. How much can you market to that customer once you've gathered that information? So it's not just that they purchased, that they're then available to engage with your product, with your brand at a later date. You then have an email address you can reach out to. You can put them on a marketing list. You can say, hey, did you know we also do X, Y, and Z? So being able to build that strong relationship with a customer is really important. And having a good level of protection of that identity is equally so. They have a level of trust in your brand. So if your brand is known for having compromised identities, hey, actually this service has lost its password database, for example, as we regularly see in the news, that erodes the perception of that brand and how likely users are to want to engage with that.
Cool. Thank you. So if you have any questions, please type them in the chat. In the meantime, I would like just to tell you that this is our last edition before the summer break. So we're going to take a break for the summer, but we will be back in September. We have a question from Ala. Can you share some B2B examples, Andy?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're talking about customer identity, that's normally, I want to say it's an older term for it. What we tend to refer to now is external identity. So those are identities of individuals who are not being paid to interact with your product or your service. So think of partner organizations that I need to get to do some work. That might even be my supply chain. I need to manage the downstream identities of both those partners as an organization and of the employees associated to those partners. They may have their own internal IDP, in which case I can federate between the two and they sign in centrally with their organization, or they may have, or they may not have that and need to sign in directly with my service. So that could be partners, that could be volunteers is a really common example we see in this use case of people who are not direct members of an organization needing to have still a first citizen type experience when they're signing in. You want to make sure that those individuals have a good experience so they return and they're engaged with your product. I hope that helps.
How is that, Ala? Is it enough for you? Do you have any other specific question?
No, it does. It's very helpful. My product is based on partnership, so the example is very, very relevant. Thank you.
Good.
Great. Good. So if there are no more other questions, I think we're gonna close for today. I would like to remind you that we're gonna share the recording. I think James, would you like to ask your question directly to Andy?
Yeah, hi. So we've got some use cases where we service hotels with an extranet on our side, and they have to log in and get access to PCI secured data. So it needs security in that sense, and the staff on the receptions, they will change often. So it'll, 1 month it'll be somebody, they'll move to a different hotel or a different chain, and then it'll be somebody else coming in and they need a new account or something like that. So I think the location is often the same, but the person is different who needs an authenticated access. So have you got any examples or use cases in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. The key when solving any of those, what we refer to as transient workforce type scenarios, is these people may have accounts that last weeks, months, days. They are really short-lived. It's looking at who owns that master record, of saying who is responsible for making sure that the right people have an account. So as I mentioned earlier, having that cross-federation between different organizations. So if you're saying each of those hotels has its own IDP, so someone somewhere says who is employed and who is not. That is the master record of who should have an account on your service. It's then up to some form of linking with that master record of, I want to create, update, delete records from your identity database effectively. We've seen that especially with food retailers, where for things like their loyalty program, I can have an internal identity, I can have a customer identity. I want to link the two together. I get some kind of discount when I'm an employee. I should lose that discount the moment I cease to be an employee. But those employees are really transient. They may be university students, for example. They come and go every couple of months. So they lose that access periodically. So it's down to having some kind of hook to that master record to say who is and who is not involved.
Understand. Okay, thanks. And then if that owner of that master record, let's call it the general manager of the hotel, they're kind of not available at that point, can you, is there a sort of, they get notified rather than them giving approval, they're more informed, or is that breaching? Then I guess that's up to our business rules, but
yeah, absolutely. That comes down to what do we want to do? Do we want to block all access until someone gives the okay, or do we want to allow access and notify? Yeah. Those are two very different solutions. If you're PCI compliant, I'm going to go with it's probably a block rather than a, hey, we're going to let you in but notify.
Understood. Okay, thank you very much. That's great.
No worries.
Great. Good. So thank you, Andy. If people have questions, they can reach out to you. I think you've shared your Twitter account, right?
Yep, absolutely. That'll be on the slides.
Twitter
it's just
handle.
Andy March. You can, feel free to ask anything.
Great. So if there are any questions or you're looking to implement any of the things you've seen today, or are just in general challenged by the security aspect, please reach out to Andy. He's here for you. Good. With that being said, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're gonna share the recording after, and I hope you enjoy your week. And Andy, any last words from you?
No, that's it from me. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending.
Good. Bye.